don't want that. Yesterday's lesson was one where we set up an app that, if I pull it onto the screen, you can see if it still works. Yep, we've got a tab bar. This is Levi. And then we've got a table view controller that when we select any of these rows, so using the table view delegate method, did select row at, or something like that. When we tap it, it's going to crash. And it's going to say there is no identifier in the segue. So the reason this happened was, in my storyboard, come on. In my storyboard, I had these things set up so that I could segue from tapping this cell to a detail view. But at the end of yesterday's lecture, I deleted this segue, and then now I tried to recreate it. And what I hadn't done is given that segue table view cell. I hadn't given that segue an identifier. So again, when I set up a segue here, I can give it an identifier. That is what I call it when I try to create an instance of it. Because a segue is of type UI storyboard segue. Let's find it. Ooh, let's organize my files a little better. New group from selection, controllers. New group from selection, views. New group from selection, models. Great. So it's organized better. Now I know where everything is, and I want to look in my movie list view controller. So I have a prepare for segue function here that says, look at the segue before you complete it from this view controller. So there's a segue from this movie list view controller, which I can see in my storyboard. It's right here. From this movie list view controller to some destination view controller. Sounds good to me so far. Okay. So there's a segue. The problem is I have a guard statement here that crashes when that segue has no identifier. Right now, that segue has no identifier. So this guard statement triggers a fatal error. It literally crashes my app. It says, guard against this situation. There are other things you would do with a guard. You might send some response saying, you might have put up like a pop-up saying, I couldn't do that right now. It's not working as expected. So the guard is just to say, if this information doesn't work out the way that I wanted, you can do something in response to that. That's this else statement. So it crashed because I didn't have an identifier. Let's give it an identifier. I'm going to call it list to detail segue. How do you all feel about the new classroom arrangement, by the way? Cool. So now I'm going to just keep changing this so that it keeps breaking and you see what these guards do. I'm going to change the class of the view controller to just be a regular UI view controller. Now when I look at the code in this prepare for segue, where can I expect it to crash? So it's no longer going to crash because there's no segue identifier because I just set that up. What's the next thing we go into though? Kimball. So my guard statement here says if there's no identifier for the segue, crash. I just set an identifier for the segue, so now I know this is going to be fine. What's going to happen next? Okay, go past the crash. What's the next line you see?
It's going to go to the tell.
Okay, tell me about it. Where do you see that?
Segue identifier, the case is supposed to be tell segue.
Cool. So the case here, this string matches the identifier for my segue. Sounds good. What is this line doing? Sorry, what are these lines doing? Do you remember the term for this as thing? You want to phone a friend? Anyone. Everyone's your friend here.
Oh, downcasting.
Downcasting, great. So it's an attempt to, because segue.destination returns a UI view controller, we tell the program, okay, you just returned to me a UI view controller, but can you please try to give it to me as a movie detail view controller? So downcasting is attempting to take something of one type and turn it into another type. Because UI view controller is the superclass for a movie detail view controller, this should work. However, let's run it and see what happens. Run. Go into our tab, click it. Oh no. So now it crashes again. Where it crashes is in the segue at this guard statement. Anthony, can you tell me anything about why this is crashing here? Cool. So segue.destination, let's say we just look at my storyboard here. Here's the segue. What's my destination? This guy? Cool. So this view controller, this crash is saying that when I tried to set up this view controller as this specific type of view controller, so the destination, when I tried to downcast it to movie detail view controller, it didn't work. It says unexpected segue VC, view controller. So it's saying that I tried to downcast it to the thing I wanted it to be, but it's not working. And the reason is because I just set up before that this would no longer be of the class movie detail view controller, but instead it'd be a UI view controller. We can't downcast a superclass to a subclass. We can downcast in the other direction. So this superclass of movie detail view controller is UI view controller. If I have a UI view controller, I can downcast to a movie detail view controller if the thing we're actually looking at is a movie detail view controller. However, I can't do it in the reverse direction. I can't say, hey, UI view controller, do you have all the stuff that needs to go into a movie detail view controller? I can't do the downcast in that direction. Think of it kind of like protocols, which I think is like a much more concrete version of inheritance, or much more concrete explanation than inheritance. Movie detail view controllers get everything that a UI view controller has. So if a UI view controller has a whole bunch of functions and properties, the movie detail view controller has that as well. The difference with inheriting from a class versus using and conforming to a protocol is that when you inherit, all the things in UI view controller are already implemented. Whereas when you conform to a protocol, you have to implement them yourself. Or you have to extend the protocol so that there's an implementation. You have to do that. So movie detail view controller can be downcast from a UI view controller. So the return value of segue.destination is a UI view controller. It can be downcast to a movie detail view controller because in our interface builder, I've assigned the class of this thing we're trying to segue, so segue's destination, segue.destination. I've assigned the class to be movie detail view controller. It did not work before because this thing's class, when I removed it, the destination is just UI view controller. So all I'm doing is showing you the errors and why we've guarded for them. What are some questions you have so far? So far I've crashed on the segue's identifier, and then I've crashed on the segue's destination. And there are plenty of more ways we can crash here. What are some questions you have so far though? Phoenix?
Is there which method to transfer the data from one to use? This one or the other one?
I personally prefer the other one. But if you want to be setting up segues in your storyboard, it does keep all of the navigation consistent. So if you've got, instead of, say I got rid of all these segues, and I guess I'd have to get rid of the navigation controller. But say they all existed without any links, it would be really hard without going into the code to know which view controller goes to the next one. So segues are just a much easier visual representation of that. I would say if you like the other way, go for it, but you need to know how your code works then. For now, I'd say our default should be using segues and using prepare for segue as a way to get information between view controllers. All right.
Just
Yep.
the repo.
Sorry?
I clone this repo.
I'm on a different branch.
Different branch.
Yes.
Data branch.
Yes.
There's a lot of stuff missing.
I disagree. Let's check my Git status. Check my Git diff. Whoa, I renamed the things. Storyboard changed. Type in Git branch. And see what branch you're on right now. You have to get to David's branch. All right. Let's keep going here. I'm not going to do the guard for, I'm not going to go through the guard for this index path because it's not really easy to simulate. The important thing here is what's happening on line 110. Can someone walk me through what's happening on line 110? Angela, can I ask you to walk me through it? Great. So in my movie detail view controller, which is the destination of this segue, there's a property called movie. So if we go and look at the definition of that, we see that a movie detail view controller has a property called movie. Great. Yes. If you hold command and click, it brings up this jump to definition thing. And you can do that for like literally everything. You can just keep going and finding out more. I can look at the definition for a string. Let's not do that right now. So to this property movie, I'm looking at the model in my list table view controller, and I'm picking out one of those movies. I'm picking out the movie at the exact row that I tapped. So that's why when I run this, let's run it again. Hopefully it works. Class, yep. Okay, so when I run this, and I tap on a cell, the row here is row 0. So when I go and I look at the movie list table view controller, the movie that I'm setting to the view controller that I'm about to segue to is the movie at that row. So movie at index 0. So the very first movie. So when I tap this cell, which has been populated with the first movie in my movies model, it's going to say, go ahead and just grab for me that one movie. So if I look at the definition of movies, or if I look at where it's declared, it's movie.allmovies. The first one of those is Minions. That's great. So movies at index 0 is Minions. So it uses my model to figure out what information should be in the next view controller. And it literally, what it's doing on line 110 is giving the model information to that new view controller. It is setting up the data that that new view controller needs. So when I tap Minions, and I go to, I've transitioned to a movie detail view controller. I've set the movie, and then in my view did load, it sets up my views based on that movie. So we've passed model information from one view controller to the next one in our segue. So that's what prepare for segue does, is it lets you pass information between the view controller you're currently in and the view controller you're going to go to. We pass that information using model information. We don't pass view information. The detail view controller should be all set up to work how it does using the model that it's been provided. Just like this table view controller is all set up to work if you just give it a model. It doesn't need to know anything about any other views or any other controllers. It just needs to know what data goes into it. So when we talk about multiple MVC, we talk about repeating the pattern MVC for multiple controllers which show views and use specific models on their controllers. So when you're going between controllers, always think that the only information that should be passing is model information, is data. So here we have a table view controller that's data is a list of movies. When we go to the detail view controller, the data is one movie. And that's the information that's been transferred. We just send model information between them. I'm going to just say it one more time because it's super important. In this prepare for segue, before we do the segue, we literally say, hey, in my destination, so I've tapped this, prepare for segue starts right now once I let go. In the view controller we're about to go to, so my destination view controller or segue.destination, in that view controller, please do me a favor and set that movie property, which is some data it's going to use to lay out its UI, set that equal to some data that I have here in my list, in my table view controller. So you're just passing model information between those things. Super important. This is how you have clean MVC and you don't cry like 3 hours later when you have 3 view controllers and you don't know what goes between them. I promise you. If you just keep if you write things down, just scribble the letters M, V, and C at the top of every page of your notebook. Just keep it on your mind at all times. It's a design pattern that's meant to spare you grief in the future because you know how this thing is designed. Neato.
The fatal errors you write there, those are really like notes to yourself then to know where to breaks and like what to go back and fix.
Yeah, but it's yes, and think of it like if you actually made an app that crashed at this point, like it'd be completely unusable. You should probably not ever use a fatal error, but here I'm using it to like demonstrate. This is such a bad situation that I'm going to crash the app, and then I'd like need to fix that. Obviously, I need to come up with a solution.
Is this something you would like leave in code at like production level? You would take this out?
No, unless like it would be really bad practice to put in fatal errors unless there's like maybe a data issue, like if there's some situation where data is not safe when a user does something that like is a real edge case, you might crash as opposed to giving them access. But that's super rare, if never. Yeah. This is like in development mode, I think it makes it scarier than a printout to crash the app when you do the wrong thing, which I think is a good thing. If the app crashes, you know where it crashed. It's a good question. Michelle. You would have to handle this error. So you might put, for example, I'm just going to steal some code. You might put a UI alert controller that says something like, if the segue has no identifier, then present an alert to the user to make it a little more user-friendly and say like, okay, here's an alert controller. The title of it is, oh no. The message says, there's no, or something like, you try to be user-friendly, so you might say like, the app doesn't know how to do that. Maybe you might give a little more specific message. And now if I run it, having gotten rid of the identifier, I guess I got rid of the segue altogether. If I get rid of the identifier, and it guards for the identifier, this guard statement is going to fail, so it's going to go into the else, and it should present no, I don't need that, sorry. I just copied some code. Let's see. So that identifier is no longer there. This guard statement is going to fail. And where does that go to? Let's leave some braces. May not fall through. Consider a return. Let's just return. Let's see if that works. Okay, so now this should crash again because my segue here has no identifier. So I've guarded and made sure that it does have an identifier. Otherwise, so if it doesn't have an identifier and this value comes up nil, it's going to do whatever is inside of this, I don't know, this like block of code. It's kind of like a closure, a little bit. So let's see it in action. I know I just ran it, sorry. So now when I tap a cell, unexpected segue identifier. Did I update this in the wrong place? Yep. So there's a space there. We put this here. Sorry about that. Okay. Let's do it again. And UI, let's just see it in action first. Crashed. Oh, I need to crash it there. Am I in the right place? Let's take a look. Let's debug a little bit. This is not crashing where I expect it to. It keeps crashing right after. We check out this storyboard segue. going to do that. If I look at my prepare for segue in this view controller, let's see what's going on. So, let's comment this out. Prepare for segue down at the bottom. There's no identifier, crash. If the identifier is not right, present an alert, and then I need it to crash here. Let's see if that fixes it. So this is all within that guard statement. Nope. Where am I at? Fatal error. Not working. It's able to get that movie detail view controller. It should be crashing in the default. That's right. Because the segue identifier is not this. So I've got my alert in the wrong place, guarded for the wrong thing. So the segues identifier is not this string. So the guards inside of here won't trigger because this case doesn't get matched. Instead, I need to have my alert in the default. Because my segues identifier is not list to detail segue. Damn, that was a pain. Now when I tap it, I need it to not crash. And let's see if this works. Cool. So for error handling, you might give more of a, it really depends. You might give something in the UI that helps guide the user. I probably might not even give this kind of alert because it's like admitting failure to the user. You really want the user to know as little about your app as possible because for the interface, it should be as intuitive as possible. But that's an alert. Feel free to look at the code for this. There's plenty more that you can add to it. I don't think it's worth going into right now. It's a pretty simple thing. A UI alert controller, if you check this out. Whoa, it's a subclass of UI view controller. So it's a view controller that just works in a certain specific way. So what I'm doing here is I'm instantiating one. I'm adding to it something called a UI alert action, which we don't really know anything about. But if I look at UI alert controller, I see that UI alert controller has things called actions, which are an array of UI alert actions. Levi.
You got that UI alert that was
Yep.
click that, just go back instead of
Yeah. So UI alert action, well, only because I've set it up this specific way. That's a great question. UI alert action says what each button should do in your alert. So let's say I add, let's add another one. UI alert action 1. It says nope. And then alert.add action, alert action 1. Now if I run it, I'll see 2 of them. Ultimately, the important thing is this handler. Hang on just a sec. Okay, and nope. Right now they do the same thing because this handler is where you say what you should do if you press this button. So it might be like that you try to transition to a new view controller and then a pop-up comes up and says, actually, we didn't know how to do that. And then one of those buttons might be like, go back. So the handler is where you set up some code that might be like self.navigation controller dot something about the root, pop to root view controller. You don't have to know what that is right now, but that's where you would set up how you actually handle the user interaction for the button that they press. You can ask for more information. You can tell them how to use the view in a certain way. It's all how you make, I'll just leave that in, I guess. It's all how you make the app user-friendly. You make it actually easier for them to work with. Okay. Let's take a 5-minute break.
Had an epiphany while you were lecturing.
Say that again?
I had an epiphany while you were lecturing.
Epiphany, those are good.
I couldn't understand why it couldn't find an image when I would click on the cell or do anything. I did not prepare for study.
Oh,
You've only been going over this for the past 2 days.
that's okay. You don't have to learn it on the very first try.
I know, but it's just so funny. It's like, huh? Is that why it's not? That's why it's not.
Mm-hmm. I get it. Makes sense.
We were at lunch.
Raz.
We decided that we need a mascot.
Oh, it's the raspberry.
And his name is Raz.
I appreciate it. I like it. No.
We're gonna get a tattoo. Do a class tattoo of the pomegranate raspberry.
Are we still recording? Hello. Are we still recording?